Hello, good morning. Got a question for you as soon as we get started. Have you ever taken or are you currently using a binder? So in case you're not aware of what a binder is something like a zeolite, an activated charcoal, some kind of clay, anything that you're taking with the intention of binding some toxins. Are you on any? Have you ever taken any? What have you tried? What have your results been? Interested to hear? Leave me that as a comment straight away. So today we're going to talk about binders. We're going to talk about how to use them for the greatest effect, how to some do's and don'ts, and how to get the most bang for your buck with this kind of thing. So the whole point of a binder is basically to attach to something that is going to cause you harm and to help to facilitate the removal of that from your body. So you've got some pretty extreme level binders where we're talking like mineral and metal chelation therapies. We're not talking about that today. That's like a medical treatment, and you need to speak with your doctor if you want to learn more about that. But for today we're talking about binders that pretty much you can get very easy access to. So primarily activated charcoal, clays, so things like bentonite clay, but it doesn't have to be that, any type of clay, and also zeolites. There's a lovely little waterfall there. Can you see it? And we're not talking about nano binders today. That's a topic for a different day. I'm not as educated on those as regular binders, so I'm not talking about nano scale binders. So things like nano zeolites, nano charcoal. We're not talking about that. We're talking about regular binders. So these are the binders that you might find very commonly on Amazon. These are the binders that have been used traditionally and ancestrally for hundreds of thousands of years. It's been very well known. So activated charcoal is basically just sort of like, it's like burnt wood, really. They usually make it out of either bamboo or coconut husks, coconut shells, or different types of hardwood. And the way that this was used was if you would have like food poisoning or you would be intoxicated by something. Ancestrally, we would just sort of like eat charcoal out of the fire. So there's some quantity of activated charcoal in this charcoal, but nowadays we can make sure that it's way more active, way more activated. So it's activated charcoal. It's actually able to function as a binder instead of just only being partially effective. So, it's a bit hot today. So the thing that we want to consider with binders is they're having their primary function in the digestive system. This is where they're really working. So this is why binders, even things like activated charcoal, are used when people are, say for example, intoxicated with alcohol, or they take too much paracetamol or some kind of toxin. What they're trying to do is they're trying to bind whatever is, so this is administered in the ER, emergency room, and they use activated charcoal for this a lot of the time. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to bind these things in the small intestine, in the digestive system, so that they don't have a chance to absorb. Because even though I'll say this many times, even though your intestines are inside you, so they're like this tube that goes through you, they're actually technically outside of you. So your intestines are like this hollow tube that is outside of you, inside of you. And in this area, it's not really doing much harm. It's only when it absorbs that it really causes a problem. It's only when it passes the gut barrier and leaves this outside cavity that's inside you and actually comes into your body that it can cause harm. Especially things like alcohol and paracetamol, because everything that comes from your digestive system has to go to your liver before it enters circulation. So this is why these things are really dangerous for the liver, because the liver has to process everything that comes from the digestive system. But this isn't the only, these are the two sort of very acute examples that are very well known, very common. But the same can be said for anytime we're trying to detox. So when we're trying to pull toxins out of the cells, we're trying to move the toxins from the blood, basically the liver tries to take them out. It tries to put them into bile and push them into our digestive system. And the function of a binder here is really to bind with the toxins that are present in the bile, so it binds to it, it escorts the toxin out of the body in the stool, and then the bile acid, which is very expensive, is then able to be reabsorbed. There's one example of a binder that doesn't exactly function like this, and this is cholestyramine. So cholestyramine doesn't just bind to the toxin. Let me just make sure I don't get run over. Yeah. Cholestyramine doesn't just bind to the toxin, it actually binds to the whole bile acid, and it basically strips your body of bile. So this is one reason many people get constipated when they're using, well, especially cholestyramine, because it's basically stealing your bile. And bile is needed for regularity, it's needed for fat-soluble nutrient absorption. It's really important, and it's really expensive. And if you're at the point where you're using a binder, your liver is probably already struggling. If you're using a binder, your liver is probably working really hard for you already. And if you use something like cholestyramine, you're basically stripping your bile out of your body, and bile is really expensive to use or to make. In fact, it's so expensive the body reuses it 9 times. So the reabsorption rate for bile acids in the small intestine is about 90% in healthy people. So we can even be reabsorbing the same bile acids so say we eat a large meal with a lot of fat. We can reabsorb the same bile acids and reuse them 4 times in the same meal. So it goes to show you how important it is that there's this recirculation loop occurring. The thing is, if this bile is full of toxins, so the bile is how your body is removing all fat-soluble toxins from your body, if this process of reabsorption is occurring and it's full of toxins, you're re-intoxicating yourself. You're only really detoxing at a rate of about 1/10 of the rate that you should be, because 9/10 of this bile is being reabsorbed. So what causes this problem to go wrong? And this is where we really get to the root cause of what's going wrong and why binders can be helpful. Well, there's a process that occurs in the small intestine where our healthy beneficial microbes, so our probiotics, our bifidos, our lactose, all of our healthy bacteria, and this is especially the case with the organisms that really like to eat bile acids. So this is like your hydrogen sulfide reducing organisms. I can't remember them off the top of my head. They've got very interesting names, but they're often the ones that cause the hydrogen sulfide gas, so the hydrogen sulfide SIBO type situation. And what's happening in this case is these organisms are trying to do this detoxification process for the bile. They're trying to take the toxin off of the bile so then we can reabsorb the bile without auto-intoxicating ourselves. So this might be a situation where a binder would be very helpful, because whenever the bile is being released, if we've got the right bacteria there and in the right amounts, they're going to be able to take the toxins out of the bile, hold them for you, and excrete them in your poo. Your poo is like 80% living and dead bacteria, and they're holding toxins that they've removed for you. So if you have deficiencies in your microbiome, you might struggle with detoxification because you're getting this auto-intoxication loop happening with the toxins that are present in the bile. So this is all fat-soluble toxins. And just to give you an example of fat-soluble toxins, this is metals. So this is aluminium, this is mercury, this is agricultural pesticides, herbicides, things like that. So glyphosate. This is any type of xenoestrogenic plastics. So this is plastics from food that you're contaminated to. If you're wearing like polyester and you're absorbing it, this is being detoxed that way. This is things like mold. So there's a whole different host of even things like gasoline. So you're basically exposed to these all the time. There's chemicals like this in paint, in formaldehyde, in furniture, flame retardants in your pillows, and all these different things. So you're exposed to these all the time. And that's not really a problem if you've got good bile flow, so your body's able to remove these things. And you've also got the right bacteria to take the toxin off the bile so it doesn't reabsorb. So if this is missing, obviously the first and most important step is to replenish the microflora. Put the microflora back so that we can restore the body's ability to do this properly, the way that it's designed to do and the way that it's supposed to work. But if you're missing these flora for some reason, obviously we need to start replacing them, but we can use binders temporarily to help the body do this job that it's trying to do. So whenever your body's releasing these fat-soluble toxins, we still need probiotics there to facilitate this process of removing the toxin from the bile acid. But instead of it having to bind to the organism, kill the organism, and then the organism is excreted, the bacteria can take the toxin and bind it to activated charcoal or to clay or to zeolite. And this way it doesn't sort of die, and it's able to continue doing its function and it's supporting this process of detoxification a little bit. So with all of that in mind, the binder isn't really doing you very much help if you're not taking it when you're having bile release. So all of these toxins, I mean, it could help to some degree if you've got the gut flora is actually your primary source of toxicity. If you have many food intolerances and you've got like a massive dysbiosis, and you know whenever you eat it basically makes you feel nauseous and unwell, and these are really good signs that your liver is overwhelmed, there's probably a lot of toxins, lipopolysaccharides, maybe fat soluble toxins, maybe you've got mold colonized in the gut and it's producing these toxins. And in this case, taking binders around when you're eating these foods can help, because it's going to bind some of these toxins in the gut and prevent them from being absorbed. But again, ultimately, most important thing is, if you've got this source of toxicity being your gut, instead of just binding the toxins there, we need to actually change the composition of the gut. So instead of it being your significant contributor to disease, we need to change it so that it's a huge advocate for your health. Because if your gut isn't working properly and your gut isn't working for you, it's working against you, that's going to make everything hard, because it's so involved in detoxification, it's so involved in you getting the nutrients that you need to do all of these other processes. All of your nutrients that you absorb basically come from your gut. So if that's not working properly, you're gonna really struggle. So the best way we can use a binder is to stimulate a bile release, and then ensure that we've got, if we can, the right bacteria present to facilitate this process, and if not, a binder present to help with binding the toxins so we don't reabsorb them in the bile. So my favourite way to go about this is, we start with the coffee enema, because the coffee enema encourages detoxification in the liver. It increases glutathione 900%, or glutathione reductase, so this is the enzyme that recycles glutathione. Really important, because glutathione is actually a binder that isn't just functioning in your gut, it's functioning in the rest of your body. You can think of any antioxidant as a binder, because even so, things like vitamin C, any kind of antioxidant is like a binder, because these things that are pro-oxidative, these are what toxins are basically. Something is considered a toxin to your body if it's pro-oxidative. So if you combine this pro-oxidant with an antioxidant before it's able to do any harm, it's bound and it's harmless now. So it's not, the way this thing really goes badly is these molecules go on a rampage of causing oxidative damage. So things that are basically like toxic to us, they are missing an electron. So they're hungry for an electron. So what they do is they just go to any random cell in your body and they basically just rip the electron off of it. But then they're like, this is bad in itself, but the really sinister part of this is now this molecule, this cell that you had in your body, that was a healthy cell that was working for you, has just had an electron ripped off of it, and now it's a pro-oxidant, it's inflammatory, so it wants to go to some other molecule and rip an electron off of that, and then you get this massive reactive oxygen cascade, where every molecule that's had an electron stolen from it becomes pro-oxidative. So then that wants to go and steal another electron from something else. So this is basically the way that antioxidants work, is they have a spare electron. So instead of these pro-oxidative substances coming along and ripping electrons out of your healthy cells, they bind to glutathione or vitamin C or whatever it is, and they become neutralized. So they're harmless. They're not going to, even if they're in the body, they're still not, they're not reactive anymore. They're not going to do damage so much. So this is one reason that a coffee enema is really great, because first of all, as we increase the amount of glutathione reductase, we increase the amount of glutathione we have, so we're binding these toxins in the liver, so from the blood in the liver. So even if this reabsorption process does occur, it's not like the toxin is being reabsorbed and it's a reactive oxygen species. At least it's already bound, so it's going to come back into the liver. The liver still has to do the work to push it back out, which is not great, but it's way better than it being reabsorbed and it just going on a rampage and ripping your liver apart and pulling electrons off of all of these molecules, because it's a reactive oxygen species. So even if you do have reabsorption occurring, coffee enemas are great because of this. This is why glutathione and other type of antioxidants are really kind of like the best binders, really, because they work inside your body, not just in the gut. But say you've got say you do a coffee enema, and it stimulates a very strong bile release that's absolutely full of toxins. You didn't have enough antioxidants to bind all of these reactive oxygen species in the bile, in the liver. So some of them come out in the bile and they're still reactive. The way that a lot of these things work, so clays and charcoals and things like that, is they work through adsorption. So this is not absorption, it's different. What's happening here is they basically have spare electrons sticking out the side of it. So you can imagine you've got a school bus, and all of the little kids, they're like toxins. Maybe not the best analogy, but here we're going with it. So in absorption, all of the little kids go into the bus, and they're inside the bus, and they've been absorbed, they're inside it. Whereas with adsorption, it's kind of like, instead of the kids going into the bus, they all kind of get stuck to the outside. So inside is still empty, and outside all the kids are like stuck to it. So it's like magnetic, and it really is like magnetic because it's working through this spare electron, like sort of connecting into the inflammatory molecule. So this way it's bound and it's in the gut. And one reason this is really great is because these binders don't leave the gut, they stay in the gut. So this is really helpful because now the toxin, the pro-oxidative toxin, is bound with something in the gut that is, this molecule that's in the gut, the activated charcoal, the clay, the zeolite, is big enough that it can't be reabsorbed. I mean, if you have increased levels of intestinal permeability, that may still be happening, but a lot of these binders are so big that even if you have increased intestinal permeability, the likelihood of these things absorbing is really low because they're quite big molecules. And again, even if they did absorb, it's not really the end of the world because they're bound. So the molecule, as it comes back into the body, isn't going to go on this pro-oxidative rampage where it just continually rips electrons off of everything because it's already bound to something that's giving it an electron, which is the charcoal or the clay. So the best way that you can use a binder would be to use it alongside something that stimulates a bile release. So this could be a high-fat meal, or I really like the coffee enema because the coffee enema is doing a lot of binding and detoxification by itself, and it's particularly stimulating a release of bile that's very high in toxins. And this is when you want to be using the binder. You don't want to be just taking the binder all of the time, because even though, so the things that are beneficial for us, so things like magnesium, calcium, the healthy minerals, these have spare electrons as well, so they kind of act like antioxidants. And this is why binders don't affect them so much, because the activated charcoal, the clay, it only wants to bind with something that's missing an electron. But things like magnesium, calcium, they aren't missing electrons, they're actually providing them. It's one of the reasons that they're healthful. So you hear about this concept of like an alkalizing diet. Basically all we're trying to do in an alkalizing diet is provide the body with extra electrons. So it's not as simple as acid alkaline, it's about providing extra electrons. So this is why you can take binders with certain types of foods, and it doesn't really impact nutrient absorption as significantly as it's made out, because it's not just working through absorption, it's working through adsorption. But still, if you can avoid it, you don't want to just be taking these binders all of the time. You want to be taking them in a very specific window when you know you have an increased level of toxicity inside your gut. So if you do this right after a coffee enema, that's great, because you've just stimulated a very powerful release of toxic bile from your liver, from your gallbladder into your small intestine. Then we combined the toxins that are present there with the binder, whatever it is that you're taking, which can then be safely excreted without being reabsorbed. So that is really the best way that you can use a binder. They're not even necessary. If you can't tolerate binders, that is totally fine. What I would focus on is restoring your body's ability to do this process naturally. So the way that your body would do this is taking the organisms, the probiotics, would take the toxins and they would bind them to fibres in vegetables. It's becoming more common that you can use supplements like inulin, or like even things like okra. People have been supplementing okra because it's been discovered that it's quite a powerful binder. So it is food-based binders, but everything is basically a binder. All these vegetables work very effectively as binders, and even if they don't, they're still full of prebiotic fibres that are going to facilitate the growth and the development and the diversification of your microbiome. And these microbes are your body's preferred way of doing this process. So if we can focus on restoring the microbiome, the binder becomes unnecessary. So that's really the focus. The focus is make it so that the body is able to do the things that it usually is able to do naturally, and it's just, if it's temporarily lost this ability, so if the microflora is off and you're not able to detoxify properly because the right microbes aren't there, we can support them by supplementing the probiotics and by providing a binder so they have something to bind to. So I hope that's been informative, I hope that's been helpful, I hope that's given you a new perspective on binders. If it has been interesting and if it has been helpful, please let me know, leave me a comment, because, I mean, well, I'm kind of just walking anyway, but I do take time out of my day to try and share this insight with you. This is hard-earned info through many years of my own suffering, so if you appreciate me sharing to try and help you suffer less, please let me know, leave me a little heart, leave me a like. I really appreciate it. So, Alan says, good lesson, Will. Thank you so much, Alan. I'll speak to you all soon. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.